Let's look at the slide. What is the scope of ISO 31000? So basically, ISO 31000 is, as I mentioned to you earlier, it is a guideline standard, risk management guidelines. Okay. Now, the guidelines which are available in the standard needs to be customized in the context in which the organization is using it. And as I mentioned to you in the morning, it is a open model standard. You need to customize the standard for the purpose for which you want to achieve your strategic objectives. So it could be customized in the context for a construction industry, power industry, banking industry, manufacturing industry, government organization, income tax department, information security perspective, whatever. Second point is, irrespective what is your purpose, what is your industry, what is your function, what is the management system against which you want, it follows a common approach. It provides consistency in your approach for risk management. Then it covers the entire life cycle of an organization risk management, starting from how do you establish a framework for managing risk, what are the guidelines for implementing it, what are the guidelines for monitoring and reviewing the performance of your risk management framework, how do you continually improve your risk management framework and the risk management. So it covered the entire life cycle of risk management, customized and tailored to achieve the strategic objectives of your organization. Another advantage or scope of the risk management framework is it can be applied at all levels and all functions. So, for example, if you want to follow the guidelines of 31,000 for PMO, or for managing mergers and demergers, or for taking a decision to move to a new geography, or for taking a decision to start a new product, or you want to do it at the strategic level, or you want to do it at the tactical level, or you want to do it at an operational level, or you want to apply the guidelines for ISMS or BCMS or quality management or privacy or GDPR or cloud security, you can apply it. You want to use it for only legal counsel, or you want to use it only for physical security, or you want to use it only for third party risk management. So it can be customized, applied at all levels and all functions. And last is the output of the risk management guidelines is it helps you to take a informed decision. Informed decisions in terms of what are the risks to my organization in achieving its objective, what is the effectiveness of the existing controls, what is the probability that this risk will happen, what is the impact of this risk, do I take a decision to put additional controls, do I accept the risk, or do I transfer the risk, or do I mitigate the risk. So it helps you to take a decision how to manage this risk which is impacting me from achieving my strategic objective. So that is the scope of ISO 31000. Now let us read directly from the standard to get a better understanding. Okay. So we will read the introduction and the scope. Take a minute to read this paragraph on introduction. Before this, the scope. Okay. Take a minute to read the introduction. Now this is very important. So we can use the guidelines of the standard to create and protect value in achieving your organization's objectives. So why do you manage risk? You manage risk so that you can achieve the strategic objectives of your organization, take a decision, and improve the performance. Then each and every organization faces external issues, internal issues. That means external factors, maybe political factors, maybe economical factors, maybe social ecosystem factors, or it could be competition, or it could be some internal factors related to competency, budget. Now, these factors make it uncertain whether we will be able to achieve our objective. So, we identify what are the internal and external factors which are impacting us from achieving our objectives and how we are going to address this. Third aspect, as I told you, is risk management is iterative, and it helps us to setting these what should be the strategic objectives of the organization. How do we achieve the objectives and making informed decisions? Then the next point is integration. Risk management is part of governance and leadership, and it is fundamental on to how the organization is managed at all levels. It contributes to the improvement of the management system. So unless and until you have the support from governance and leadership, you will not be able to effectively implement the guidelines of the standard. And managing risk considers external and internal factors relevant to your organization. So the internal factors to for A organization A will be different for the internal and external factors which are related to B, including human behavior and cultural factors. So what is the motivation of organization A compared to the motivation of employees for organization B? What is the culture, attitudes, ownership, belongingness for organization A will be different from. So all these are factors which will influence effective implementation of the standard in your organization. Then managing risk is based on three pillars. Based on as per the ISO 31000, there are three pillars which we need to consider. The first pillar is based on principles. Now these principles are applied when we design the framework and when we design the process. So these 8 principles, the purpose of applying these principles is that when we apply the principles in managing risk, it helps us to protect and achieve the values or the intended outcome or the objectives of the organization. Now we need to apply these principles when we design the framework, and we need to apply these principles. As you can see from this diagram, they are unidirectional. So these principles are applied when we design a framework for managing risk. These principles are applied when we design a risk management process or the risk assessment process. Now, if you see, the core to the principles is, or the purpose of applying the principles is to value add in achieving your objectives. The core to designing the framework lies with leadership and commitment from the top management. And the core to the risk management process lying in applying a structured approach, a structured and comprehensive approach, a systematic approach for managing risk, irrespective what is the type of risk you're going to manage. We have to apply all these steps, starting from establishing the scope, context criteria, following a communication and consultation approach, following a monitoring and reviewing approach, identifying the risk, analyzing the risk, evaluating the risk, treating the risk, and recording and reporting the risk management. So all these are components or factors for managing risk based on the 31,000. Okay. All right. Take a minute to read the scope directly from the standard. I've already shown you the slide. So as I was mentioning earlier, this guideline, this document provides you guidelines on managing risk faced by your organization. The application of these guidelines can be customized to any organization and its context. So the context of organization A will differ from the context of organization B will differ from organization, because the objectives of the manufacturing industry is different than the pharmaceutical industry is different than the manufacturing industry is different than the IT service industry is different, commercial organization is different, government is different, etc. Second point is, this guidelines provides a common approach to managing any type of risk. It could be a strategic risk, it could be an operational risk, it could be a tactical risk, and is not industry or sector specific. It is not made for IT industry or for manufacturing industry or for any other industry. It can be applicable. And this document can be used throughout the life cycle of the organization, can be applied at any activity. So you want to take a decision for activity one or process one or procedure one or function one or a strategic level. So it helps you to take a decision at any level throughout the life cycle, throughout the life of the organization. Okay. So this is the scope which is given in the standard. I'm reading word by word so that you don't miss out. So this is what is given in the slide. Any questions on the scope of ISO 31000? Now let's look at the principles, framework, and processes and what is the relationship. I've already explained to you. Take a minute to again revise. So as per the guidelines of 31,000, risk management is based on principles. Now, the purpose of the principles is for value creation and protection, and these principles have to be applied when we design the framework for managing risk, which is given here, or when we are establishing a consistent risk management approach. So we apply all the principles when we design the framework and when we are designing the process. Now look at the unidirectional arrows. So the principles are applied both to the design and the framework and the process. And look at the bidirectional arrow. The framework design tells how we must follow a consistent approach for the risk management process or the risk assessment process. The output of the risk assessment process provides an input to change or improve or monitor the effectiveness of the design of the framework. So there is a bi-directional arrow between the framework and the process, and there is a unidirectional arrow between the principles which are applied across when we design the framework and when we design the process. In this concept, the three pillars. So risk management is based on what are the principles, how to design the framework, and how to create a common consistent process for managing risk across the organization, irrespective at what level you're doing it, irrespective for what function you're using it, irrespective whether you're doing it from information security perspective, business continuity perspective, quality management perspective, privacy perspective, PCI DSS perspective, whatever be it, or a list framework, whatever. Is the point clear to everybody? Okay. Now, what are the principles? So these are the 8 principles. And as I mentioned repeatedly, the purpose of applying these principles is for value creation and protection in achieving your strategic objectives. Now, what are these principles? We will see in little greater details as we go along. And this is the relationship between the framework and the process. Take a minute to go through. So when we design the framework for managing risk in an organization, unless and until you get sponsorship from the leadership and commitment, unless there is a direction from governance, and direction from governance is required for integrating the risk management across all functions of the organization. Direction is required when we design the framework. Direction is required how to implement it. Direction is required for what is the process for evaluation, whether we've been effectively able to implement the process, and what are the improvement action items. Now, this framework then provides a direction as to how the risk assessment process should be created. This risk assessment process is consistent. Whether I'm doing the risk assessment from information security perspective, business continuity perspective, construction perspective, strategic decision perspective, GDPR perspective, I apply the same process, same elements, same components, consistent and structured approach for risk and management. That is the uniqueness of the standard. You cannot say for ISO 2 you'll have a different process, for BCMS you'll have a different process, for financial risk you'll have a different process, for operational risk. No, same consistent and comparable results can be achieved by a consistent structured framework which can be applied at all levels and functions. And this is the structure. We will be going into great details on all these elements as we proceed on the training. This is just an overview. Are you all clear, everybody? Now, before we proceed, we must understand what is the definition of risk. But let us look at a generic definition of risk as per 31,000. As per 31,000, take a minute. The definition of risk is effect of uncertainty on objectives. Now, this definition has got three components: effect, uncertainty, objectives. It's the simplest definition in the world, but having a huge interpretation, huge meaning. Okay. So, as I said, risk has got three components: effect, uncertainty, objectives. So, effect of the uncertainty objective is the definition of risk. Now, how do we interpret it? The effect of the uncertainty is not always negative. If the effect of the uncertainty is positive, then we call it as a opportunity. So there is no separate definition for risk and separate definition for opportunity. Risk and opportunities are two sides of the same coin. Sometimes the effect of the uncertainty can be positive, then we call it an opportunity. When the effect of the uncertainty becomes negative, then we call it as a risk. Clear? Now, what could be the uncertainty? Uncertainty means deviation from the expected. Now, the deviation from the expected cannot always be negative. If the deviation is positive, then we call it as an opportunity. Now, the deviation what could be the factors which can cause this deviation or the uncertainty? Human behavior, lack of competence, demotivated employees, okay, inaccurate, incomplete information. This is uncertainty in the uncertainty in achieving the objective. Then effect of the inaccurate, incomplete information will have a negative effect in achieving the SLAs or the GDPR requirements. Then competition. You have got a technology, obsolete technology. Your competitor is providing this better technology to your customers. Obviously, that will create an uncertainty and it will affect achieving your strategic objectives. Similarly, customer expectations. If your customer expectations, if there's an uncertainty in achieving your customer expectation, this will have a negative impact in in retaining your customers and having prospective customers. So the effect of this uncertainty will be on various objectives. So the effect of this uncertainty can have an objective at the strategic level, can impact the objective at the tactical level, at the operational level, at the legal, and it could be at varying levels and functions. So some of the uncertainties can affect the information security, some can affect the business continuity, some can have a financial impact, some can have a legal impact, some can have an operational impact, and this could be at strategic level, it could be at tactical level and at operate. So this is how you need to describe the risk. When you describe the risk, what can happen, where and how, all these elements have to be kept in mind. And this is the biggest challenge. Like whatever you have said so far, we only bring out the vulnerabilities, we bring out the threats, but what is the effect of these uncertainties on objectives need to be very clearly described when we identify the risk. So keep this definition in mind. And the same definition is given in the standard. So I will refer to the definitions. Now, please read the definition of risk here. And please pay particular attention to note 1, note 2, and note 3. Take 5 minutes. Do not proceed unless you are very clear on the definition of risk. Okay, so have you been able to look at each of the notes? So as I mentioned just now, an effect is a deviation from the affected. It can be positive, it can be negative, or both, and can address, create, or result in opportunities and threats. So if the effect is negative, it will create a threat. If the effect is positive, it will create an opportunity. So this is the only standard which looks at the risks and opportunities in the same definition. Now look at the note 2. Objectives can have different aspects and categories. Okay. So what are and it can be applied at different levels. So aspects could be, we are looking at operational aspects, we are looking at financial aspects, we are looking at, and then they can be applied at different levels. So this can be financial aspect from at the strategic level, financial aspect at a particular process level. So that is how we look at objectives. Third is, risk is usually expressed in terms of risk source. That means what was the source of the risk? What were the events which have been created? What is the consequence and likelihood? So when we are describing the risk, we have to look at these four elements. What is the risk source? Source means what is the element that has given rise to the risk? What is the event which has incurred because of this risk source? Because of a risk, because of a threat exploiting the vulnerability will give rise to an event. Now, what is the consequences of this event and what is the likelihood that this event will occur? So please continue to read 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 and 3.7. Please read the note 2 as well. So event can have several causes and several consequences. Now, event could be a missed event as well. An event can also be something that is expected, which does not happen, or something that is not expected, which happens. So it is like something we don't know, unknowns. Okay. The event itself can be a risk source. For example, if the event is fire, then the fire itself is the source for giving that risk to the fire. So event can itself be the risk source. Okay. Then what is the consequences? Consequences is what is the outcome. So fire has happened. What is the consequence of the fire? We have not been able to go to the data center. People have not been able to enter the building. There is a huge loss of devices. Assets have got lost. Okay, we have not been able to meet that. So those are the outcomes of an event. Okay, there has been an hacking or there has been a ransomware. So what is an outcome of the ransomware? We have not been able to provide services to our customers and clients. So this is how you relate it to the outcome. So consequences could have positive and negative or direct impact. Some could have a positive impact, some could have a negative impact. Then these consequences can be expressed quantitatively or qualitatively. Quantitatively means when we give a value, tangible value, or qualitatively is low, medium, high. And there could be some intangible consequences as well. Okay, for example, repetition is not qualified or not quantified, but it is an intangible effect. Then consequence can escalate through cascading and cumulative effects. So one incident has happened that can give rise to another two incidents, another two incidents can give rise. So this is a cascading effect, okay, ripple effect as we call it. So when we are looking at the definition of risk, we must look at all these minor greater details and not look at fire as a risk or flood as a risk or hacking as a no, that is an incomplete description of the risk. I hope this definition of risk is clear to everybody. Effect of uncertainty on objectives. So now let's look at the risk management principles. So we will go back to the standard to understand it in greater detail. We will not. So what is the purpose of creating these principles? As I mentioned to you earlier, take a minute to read the standard word by word. So what is the purpose? So the purpose of risk management is creation and protection of value. Value for what? Protecting the strategic values or the organization values. So what are your values? So how do you protect your organization's values and achieve them? So when we apply the principles, it improves performance. So when we apply the risk management principles, it improves the performance, encourages innovation, and supports the achievement of the objectives. So when we apply all these 8 principles, when we design the framework, we improve the performance in achieving our objectives, encourage people to innovate, to address those risks and achieve the strategic objectives of the organization. So that is the importance of looking at all the 8 principles for managing risk. We need to apply all these 8 principles when we establish the risk management framework and when we establish the risk management process. And I showed you that they are unidirectional. So we apply all these principles when we establish the risk management framework, and we apply all these principles when we establish the risk management process. And these principles should help you to manage the effects of uncertainty on objectives. So when you apply these principles, you would be able to manage the effects of uncertainty, whether they are negative or so the purpose of applying these principles is to manage the effects of the uncertainty on achieving the objectives. Is it clear? Now, what are the principles? So effective risk management requires the elements of figure 2 and can be further explained. First principle of integrated. Take a minute to read. What do we understand by principle of integrated or integration? It is the same thing whether we use the word integrated or integration. So this principle says that the risk management is an integral part of all organizational activities. So when we are looking at every organization has a series of activities. There are so many functions, there are so many processes, there are so many activities. Now, whatever are the organizational activities, for example, you're providing customer support, you are having third party, you are having facility management, you are having HR. So there are so many activities which you're doing. You're having visitor management. So whatever are the activities which you're doing in your organization to achieve your strategic objectives, risk management should be an integral part of all the organization activities. It cannot say that I will apply it for activity 1 and I will not apply it to activity number 2, because risk is inherent to all activities. Therefore, risk management should be integrated or should be an internal part or an integral part of all the organization activities. Is this principle clear to everybody? Next principle is structured and comprehensive. So effective risk management should follow a structured and comprehensive approach. What does it mean? So when we look at the risk management process, so the risk management process should follow a structured and comprehensive approach. So what is a structure? We apply the principle of communication consultation, then we determine the scope, then we determine the risk appetite, then we determine the context, the next systematic processes, we do the risk assessment, then the output of the risk assessment acts as an input to risk treatment, we follow a monitoring and review. So this is a structured approach. Now, whether we are following this approach for risk at the strategic level, operational level, or tactical level, we follow a consistent approach so that we get comparable results. Not that the approach taken for strategic risk is different, the one for CFO is different, the one for ISMS is different. So to break the silos. So risk management should follow a consistent and comparable approach across the organization. Then what is the third principle of customization or tailoring? Take a minute to read this customization. So we have to apply this principle of customization to the risk management framework. So when we establish the risk management framework, we must customize the risk management framework in the context in achieving your strategic objectives. So the internal issues, external issues, legal requirement, regulatory requirement, expectation of your interested parties is going to be different for organization A compared to organization B, compared to organization C. So you need to customize the risk management framework. Similarly, you need to customize the risk management process. So if I'm doing the risk management for ISMS, so I'll customize it to achieve the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If I'm customizing the risk management process for GDPR, then I will customize the context from that perspective. So the internal issues and external issues related to one scope is going to be different than the other scope is going to be different from the other context. So we need to customize the framework and we need to customize the process in the context in which you want to achieve your objective. So we apply the principle of customization when we establish the framework for managing risk, and we apply this principle of customization and tailoring when we apply the risk management process. Now, please note the risk management process does not change. Only we customize the components. So the risk appetite for objective one will be different than the risk objective for objective two, for different for objective three. So that's how you customize. So the internal issues for process one will be different than internal issues for process two. The internal issues for organization A will be different than the internal issues for organization B. So we need to customize the framework and the process in the context of achieving your organization's strategic objectives. This principle should be very, very clearly understood by all of you. I hope you've all understood this principle of customization. Okay. Read the next principle, inclusiveness. What do we mean by inclusiveness? What is this principle and how do we apply this principle? Take a minute to read. Now, why do we need to apply this principle of inclusiveness is that we should have a policy, procedure, approach of involving various stakeholders in a timely manner. Why? Because when we involve or we apply a communication and consultation approach, we seek the views, we seek the advice, we seek the knowledge and perceptions of various stakeholders who are involved in a particular risk. So this will help to ensure that we improve the culture of the organization because we are involving everybody. We are motivating everybody to contribute. It improves the awareness and it improves that now we have not taken a decision or not come to a decision in silo. We have considered the views, perceptions, expertise, knowledge of various stakeholders who are involved in taking a decision for this particular activity, process, maybe at the strategic level, maybe at the tactical level, maybe at the functional level, maybe at ISMS perspective, various functions and levels. Is the principle of inclusiveness understood by everybody? Last word. There is nothing like frequency. It is an ongoing process. Okay? Okay. Next is dynamic. Take a minute to read. So we look at one of the challenges, risk prioritization over time. What is a risk today may not be a risk tomorrow, or it may increase or decrease, and some new risk may emerge. So, what is your policy? What is your procedure? What is your approach for seeking leading indicators, risk indicators? What is your approach for addressing lagging risk indicators? Where do you get this information from? There are various OEMs which give it. There are various government agencies which give it. There are various paid agencies, services which provide you the latest information on currency and the future risk and what has been the impact to the organizations. So risk management is not a one-time activity. It's a continual process. It's a dynamic activity. So risk can emerge based on horizon scanning. They can change. What was a risk low today can become tomorrow, or what was high can become low. They can disappear as an organization's internal and external context changes. That means the internal context may change, the external legal requirements may change, the regulatory requirements may change, the contractual requirements may change based on competition, based on customer expectation, based on technology changes. So the risk management must anticipate, must be able to say what could be future risk. Then they should be able to detect what are the risks which are relevant to my organization. Then acknowledge those risks, then respond to those changes, and events in an appropriate and timely manner. So how do I get this information? That is why I said what drives risk management? Information and knowledge. So where do you get the information on how do you anticipate what could be future risk? How do you detect what are the current risks and lagging? How do you acknowledge that this risk is relevant to me and how do I respond to this risk in a timely manner? And this can only happen when you use the principle of it. So all these principles are interrelated. So you apply a inclusive or a communication and consultation approach to include various stakeholders in your organization to provide you this up-to-date information, lessons learned from lagging risk indicators, future risks being addressed by the OEMs, by the national level, by the government agencies, by your industry standards. There are various agencies which provide you this information. But how are you capturing this information? How are you disseminating this information in a timely manner? That is the principle of dynamic. Is it clear to everybody? 100%. Okay. Next is all these principles are interrelated also. Best available information. So next is best available information. So what is the input for risk management? I should know what are what was the historical risks, what are the incidents that have already happened, what is my current risk status, and what could be the future expectation. How is the market moving? What is the volatility? What is my competition doing? How the regulatory requirements are changing? How the expectation of my stakeholders are changing? So risk management explicitly takes into account any limitations and uncertainty associated with this information. Now, how do I know what is the integrity, accuracy, completeness, and quality of this information? This information may be fake. This information may be question mark. So I should be clear what is the source of this information. And secondly, this information should be available to me in a timely manner. It should be very clear and concise and available and made available to relevant stakeholders. So if this information is related to threats and vulnerabilities related to privacy issues, or it is related to technology, or it is related to the competitor, or it is related to the regulatory requirements, then to relevant stakeholders should be passed on this information in a timely, clear-cut manner. So what is your process to get this timely information? What is your knowledge management or information management system? What are the sources of this information? What is the quality of this information? Who is getting this information? Who is disseminating this information? This is a very, very, very important principle. I hope it is 100% clear to everybody. Okay. Then we come to the next principle that is related to human and cultural factors. Now, how does human behavior change? So, human behavior is influenced by what is the organization's values, what is the organization vision. So what values does the organization communicate or direct? So human behavior will change on the values your organization has, and the behavior is going to impact the attitude. So you may be having an attitude of couldn't care less, or you may be having an attitude that yes, I am sensitive to risk management and I will contribute to the effectiveness of risk. So your behavior will change, your attitude will change based on what is the values your organization is spreading across the organization. Then the culture. Are you sensitive to risk management? Are you involving yourselves? Is your views being taken? Are the diverging views being considered effectively? Are you communicating these views? Are you rewarding those people who have been contributing to effectiveness? Are you motivating people to innovate? These are certain factors which will affect the cultural and human behavior, and they influence all aspects of the risk management at each level and stage. So if people are not ready to contribute and involve themselves in taking a decision, what should be my risk appetite? If the people are not saying, okay, what were the lessons learned from incident? If the people are not communicating, what could be the future risk? What has been their experience on the effectiveness of controls? They do not take any action on the risk treatment plans, or they are not they're not involved themselves into understanding what could be the future impacts to the organization. All these are factors which are going to impact the effectiveness of your risk management. And last is the principle of continued improvement. So, as I mentioned to you initially, risk management is an iterative process. So, what are the learnings? What has been your experience from the incident that has happened? What are the future risks? What is your experience of the effectiveness of the controls? Experience in related to customer satisfaction. They have to be factored in to provide continued improvement. So when we do internal audit, when we have the three lines of defense, then the points which have been brought out as gaps in your risk management. So we should need to evaluate what are our gaps, and when we address those gaps, we achieve continued improvement. I hope all these 8 principles are 100% clear to everybody. Okay, now you can look at the slides. So this was the first principle. This is not a principle. This is the core to the principles. Principle of integration. I have just now explained to you. Principle of structured and comprehensive approach. Principle related to customization of the framework and the process to achieve the objectives of your organization. Principle of taking the views of various stakeholders in a timely manner to take advantage of their knowledge, their views, their perceptions, lessons learned, communicating to them, providing awareness. Then risks are not static. It's not a one-time activity. Some risk will emerge, some risk will go away, some risk will change. So dynamic nature, where do you get this information? So again, the next principle is best available information. So what is your policy procedures to be aware of what is the latest information? What is the information of the past incidents? That is the lagging risk indicators, the current risk, the future risks. Okay, what is the quality of this information? What were the lessons learned? How are you disseminating this information? Because information is the input to your risk management. If you do not have information of what is the likelihood, if you do not have information of what is the event, if you do not have information what is the potential impact of the event, then how can you do risk assessment? How can you take a decision? What is my risk appetite? So all this information needs to be available. Then human and cultural factors, as I've explained to you just now, and continued improvement. So there are actually 8 principles. The first one is the core to the principles. To the actual risk management framework. So basically, when we're looking at the risk management framework, I have repeatedly brought out the same point. If you're looking at establishing a risk management framework, then the core to the risk management framework lies in the involvement, commitment from governance and top management. That means you need to demonstrate leadership and commitment towards establishing a framework for managing risk. If this particular core element is not there, forget about the other elements of the framework. The other elements in establishing a risk management framework includes integration, that we saw the principle of integration. Integration means the top management and the leadership has to ensure that risk management framework is an integral part of organization's all activities and it is not in silo. Then when we design the framework, we will take into consideration what is the intended outcome of the risk management framework. Why have we established the risk management framework? What are the internal and external issues which are impacting us from achieving our objective? What are the roles and responsibilities which we have established for managing risk? What are the resources required in terms of processes, tools, training, competency? How are we going to implement this framework? Is there a project plan to implement this framework? Who all are involved in this project plan? Have we taken into human cultural factors to involve ownership by others, and motivating others to contribute so that we effectively implement it. Once we have implemented it, what are the processes to evaluate? Have we implemented it effectively? Are there any gaps? And in case there are any gaps, can we address those gaps, lessons learned in improving it, and then provide a framework or approach for improvement? So these are the five components which we need to consider when we are going to establish the risk management framework. So this is an overview. Let us look at the standard word by word. Take a minute to read clause 5.1. Please do not miss any word, because this is the only time you will get to read the standard in great detail. Later on, you will forget about it. So the main purpose of risk management framework when you establish and implement in your organization is that, have we integrated the risk management framework into significant activities and functions? So whatever activities, functions, processes we are doing, have we integrated the risk management framework as part of all those activities? Have we integrated the risk management framework into the governance of the organization? What is the involvement of the board of directors? Have we included the risk management framework in taking a decision? What to do, what not to do, how much risk is acceptable, how much risk is not acceptable, all those points. And we cannot establish a risk management framework without the involvement and support from various stakeholders: investors, shareholders, employees, functional heads, governance, top management, regulators, and the top management. Because the top management has to give direction, they have to take a decision, and they have to control the effectiveness of the risk management framework by taking reports on the effectiveness. So, as I mentioned, framework development encompasses the following components: integration, design, implementation, evaluation, and improvement, as given in the figure 3. Let us proceed. Now, when we are going to implement this framework in the organization, we also need to evaluate. See, it is not that suddenly we have thought of risk management framework. There may be already existing policies, there may be existing procedures, there may be processes which are already there in your organization. So you will not reinvent the wheel. So we will conduct a gap assessment. And the gap assessment will say what is the requirement given in the standard, and what is the existing processes we have in our organization. So the delta between what is existing to what we need to do will tell you what is going to be my project plan. So we should evaluate any gaps and address those gaps within the framework. And the most important point is that the components which are there, these five components which are there in this particular framework, need to be customized in the context of achieving your strategic objectives. So the customization for organization A will be different for the customization for organization B. So these are the broad things which we need to consider when we are going to establish a risk management framework in your organization. Okay. Any point so far, anybody? Okay. So this much about clause 5.1. Now we are going to look at clause 5.2. So let us look at the slides. So as I mentioned to you, the one of the most important things when we are going to establish a risk management framework is what is our commitment, leadership and commitment demonstration. How can we demonstrate that the board of directors and the top management or the leadership is committed to implementing or establishing a risk management framework in our organization? So, what is the involvement of leadership? Let us look at the clause. So, in this training, I will go word by word by the standard so that you get an opportunity to not to miss out any words. So, take 5 minutes, everybody, to read this particular clause 5.2, please. Read the entire 5.2. So, what are the first four basic elements which the leadership and commitment or top management and the oversight body? Oversight body means the board of directors, okay, and top management is the CXO level. So there is a difference between top management and oversight body. The role of top management and oversight bodies is different, okay. Now, both the oversight body and the top management should firstly ensure that the risk management is integrated into the organization's all activities, and they will demonstrate their commitment by doing four things. What is the first thing? First is they will ensure that they will customize and implement all the components of the framework. So, what are the five components? Integration, design, implementation, evaluation, and the control. So, all these five components will be customized in the context of each organization separately. Then the top management will demonstrate their commitment, secondly, by issuing a statement or a policy that what is going to be our risk management approach, what is going to be the plan, or what is the course of action. So they will establish a project. They will give a project roadmap, a PMO. What is the approach? What is the course of action? What is the plan to implement the requirements in your organization? Third is they will also be able to demonstrate the commitment. They will and ensure, determine and provide that necessary resources are allocated for managing risk. Now, this project will not take on its own. So, what are the resources in terms of people, their skill sets, their competency, their availability, some processes which are required, some policies which are required, maybe some tools which are required, maybe some budget which is required, maybe some time that is required. Then, third is they will assign authority, responsibility, and accountability at appropriate levels. So, what is the role, responsibility, authority, and accountability at the strategic level, at the tactical level, at the operational level? What is the role and responsibility of the board of directors? What is the role and responsibility of the CXOs? What is the role and responsibility of the CRO? What is the role and responsibility at vertical heads? What is the role and responsibility of all employees? So, various roles at various levels, and what is their responsibility, authority, and accountability? Unless that is there, you will not get a consistent approach. So human factors, everybody should know what exactly they're supposed to do if they are going to establish a risk management framework. Now, while doing all this, what do we achieve? Take a minute to read these 6 bullets. Okay, so what we will achieve by doing this 4 things is that first we will ensure that our risk management is aligned with achieving the strategic objectives and is aligned with the culture which we have in our organization. So first is we look at what is our vision, what is our mission based, and what are our values. So mission, values is the first thing. So we look at our mission, vision, and values of the organization. Based on the vision, mission, and values of the organization, we will determine what is our strategy. What is the strategy we will follow to achieve our mission, our vision? Based on the strategy which we have chosen, there'll be different strategies, strategy one, strategies two, which is the most appropriate strategy. So you'll choose the strategy. Based on the strategy which you've chosen, Each strategy will have objectives. Now, those objectives should be such that we achieve the vision and the mission of our organization. So they are interlinked. Okay. Then, when we are going to establish the risk management framework, we need to understand and recognize what are our obligations, what are our contractual obligations, what are our obligations to our interested parties, what are our volunteer commitment, for example, commitment towards health and safety, ethics, the ethical behavior, anti-bribery, volunteer commitments. Third thing is that we will be able to help, or we will be able to establish what is the amount and type of risk that may or may not be taken. So this is the amount and type of risk I will take. This is the amount and type of risk we will not take, which will help to develop the risk criteria. So what is my risk criteria from financial perspective? What is my risk criteria for operational perspective? What is my risk criteria from legal regulatory perspective? And we will ensure that these risk criteria are communicated to the organization and its stakeholders. So without the establishing the risk criteria, if I am the functional head for HR, I will not know what is the amount and type of risk. The guideline has to be provided, the direction has to be provided by top management. Okay. Then once we have done this, we will be able to, have you understood? Okay. Then once we establish this framework, we will be able to have what is our approach for. Then the next thing is that once we have a risk management framework, this will help your organization to ensure that risk management framework remains appropriate to the context of the organization. Here is where we'll apply the principle of dynamics. Now, certain risks will emerge, certain risks will become non-existing, some new risks may come up. So how do you come to know? When we do horizon scanning, we try to get the information, knowledge and information from various stakeholders, from the various governments, from various agencies, legal bodies, regulatory bodies. So by having a framework, we will be able to ensure that our risk management framework is up to date, appropriate to the context of the organization, which is addressing internal issues, external issues, legal requirements, expectation from our stakeholders, client, customers, etc. Okay. Any questions so far? Then read the last paragraph. Now, this is very important to understand what is the role of difference between the role of top management and what is the role of oversight bodies. Now, oversight bodies is the board of directors, the governance, and top management are the people who are going to execute. So you should be able to understand what is the difference between the top management commitment and the board of directors. Take a minute to read this particular paragraph where I'm pointing out. Take 5 minutes to read. See, practically speaking, suppose an organization is failing to manage the risk. Now, this is a mandatory requirement as per the Company Act as far as the regulation is concerned. So, it's a legal regulatory requirement that the board of directors is accountable and responsible for managing risk. If something happens, the regulatory body, the shareholders, the stakeholders will ask the board of directors why they did not do due diligence and why this risk has happened. What were they doing? So they are accountable and answerable to the outside world. So and if they are accountable, then they have to be involved. So they have to provide the direction. They have to oversee how the risks are being managed. The actual execution will be done by the top management, the CXOs. So the first thing is that the board of directors are expected to firstly ensure that risks are adequately considered when setting the organization's objectives. So when we are setting our organization objectives to achieve the strategy, what were the objectives? What were the risks in achieving this objective? So you have chosen objective number one. What were the risks in objective number one? How are you managing this? Have you identified what is the objective? What is the risk to achieving the objective? You cannot just achieve the objective just by stating it and implementing it. So you have to identify what are the risks which we have considered to achieve the objective. Maybe the objective one is not meeting the strategy. So you'll have to either change your strategy or then modify your objectives. Okay. Then understand So considered the risk when setting the objectives? Now you have set the objectives. Now what will be the risk you will face? Do you understand what is the risk you will face when you are going to pursue the objectives? Then ensure that systems to manage such risk are implemented. Now this is the responsibility of the oversight body. What are the systems? What are the frameworks the top management has established to manage such risk? And are they implemented and are they operating effectively? How do they come to know? They will take some reports. They will see, okay, they will give direction, do this, do this, do this. What is the, this is where your leading risk indicators, your KPIs, your lagging indicators. So they will take a 6 monthly, annually account of what are the top risks, what is happening, what are the action items, where are we failing, what has been the customer dissatisfaction, what is the competition doing, all what to achieve the strategic objectives. Where are we failing? What we need to do? They have to provide direction. Okay. And then ensuring information about such risk and their management is properly communicated within the organization and to the outside world. So they are supposed to communicate the risk to the stakeholders, to the regulatory bodies, to the government. So all these, for example, suppose you're in the banking sector or you're in the insurance sector, then IRDA wants to know what is the risk you're facing and how you have to communicate this risk. Sometimes you have to communicate the risk to legal bodies related to health and safety, anti-bribery, first the privacy issues, many things. So let's proceed. The first component in establishing the framework relates to integration. Now, what do we need to do in integration? Let us look at the standard. Take a minute to read clause 5.3, then I will explain. Please read each and every word attentively. First thing is that when we are trying to implement or establish the risk management framework, we need to ensure that we apply the principle of integration. And the principle of integration is that the risk management framework should be an integral part of all the organization's activities and functions. So first and foremost, we need to understand what is my organization structure and what is the context. Context means what is the mission, vision, goals, objectives of my organization. Only when I know what is my org structure, okay, do I have one division? Do I have many divisions? Is it a global organization? What is the hierarchy? So this the org structure will tell me what are my functions. Okay, I've got a headquarters, then I've got a sales team, I've got an accounts team, I've got a finance team, I've got a physical team, then I've got accounts, then I've got compliance team, or so various org structures. Now org structures differ from organization to organization depending on what is the purpose. And we achieve the purpose of the organization by understanding what is the vision, mission, goals, and values of my organization. So vision, mission, goals of an organization A will differ from that of B and C, and the complexity of the organization will differ from one organization to the other. When I'm applying the principle of integration, I need to ensure that risk is managed in every part of the organization structure. Everyone in an organization has responsibility for managing risk. This should become a part of culture. This should go into the DNA of the organization. That's the meaning of clause 5.3, the first paragraph. Now, please read attentively paragraph number 2. This is applicable to all organizations. See, all organization, irrespective of what is the vision, mission, or what is the structure, what is the industry, what is the size, what is the complexity, have a governance structure. And governance structure becomes part of the board of directors. Now, what is the responsibility of the board of directors? The board of directors lays down the course of action. What is their relationship internally? What is the relationship with their clients, customers, competitors, government, legal bodies, regulatory bodies, and what are the practices? Okay, what are the best practices from various functions? Now, this particular policy, direction, processes, rules are governed or directed and comes from the governance. Now, whatever is the direction which is coming from the governance, the management structures, that means the CXOs, translate the governance direction into strategy. So the governance direction could be, we need to increase our customer base by X amount, X percentage, ensure that legal compliance is met. Now, based on those processes, rules, policies, direction, the management structures translate this governance direction into what should be my strategy to be the number one company, what should be my strategy to increase customer satisfaction, what should be my strategy to maintain health and safety, occupational health and safety with zero tolerance. What should be my strategy to increase my sales or revenues by X amount? What should be my strategy to increase customer satisfaction? So, governance gives the direction, management translates the governance into strategy. From the strategy, I achieve objectives, I derive objectives. To achieve strategy number one, first objective will be A, B, C, D, E. So, governance gives the direction, management translates the direction into strategy. From the strategy, we derive the objectives required to achieve the desired level of performance and have a long term viability. Now, determining risk management, accountability, and oversight roles within are integral part of the governance. So, when you're saying how you want to govern your company, how do you want to govern to achieve the vision, goals, objectives of your organization, automatically risk management becomes an integral part of governance and management. It is not something separate. Risk management should never be taken as something over and above, something as an overhead, something which is something different. This is very, very important as a culture, as a philosophy in an organization, which is normally missing. Normally missing. In good companies, you will find this governance very, very strong. Okay. Now read the third paragraph. Okay, so we learned about the principle of dynamics. So we have also understood that integrating risk management is a dynamic and iterative process. And very importantly, it should be customized to the organization's needs and culture. So what is the organization needs? What is the purpose of establishing a risk management framework? What do they want to achieve by risk management? They want to achieve the strategic objectives of the organization. So therefore, risk management should be part of and not separate from the organization purpose. So if you're saying this is the purpose of my organization to be the number one service provider in an IT company, then risk management is integral part to achieve that purpose. Risk management is integral part of governance. Risk management is integral part of leadership and commitment. Management is integral to, so whenever you decide or choose from various strategies of option available. So suppose there are three strategies available to me. Option one, option two. I have chosen option two. I have chosen option two because this is the least risk. There are more risk in strategy one and there are greater risk in strategy. Therefore, I have chosen strategy one. From the strategy, I have chosen the derived the objectives. Whenever we derive the objectives, what are the risks in meeting those objectives? What are the risks in operation? All this should be an integral part of governance, purpose, management, structure, everything. That is the meaning of integration. That is where we apply the principle of integration. And that is where you and I can do nothing. This is where the leadership and commitment, board of directors and the CXOs play a major role. If they are not involved into this particular integration process, then you and I can do very little. So this thought process should be very clear to all of you. Any questions in 5.3, anybody? Okay. Then let's go to the design part. Let's go to the slide. So this is the integration. Now, when we are designing the risk management framework, what are the guidelines provided in the standard? Let's have a look. Now, the first thing is, as per clause 5.4.1, as part of design, So when you design a framework which is customized to the purpose of your organization, when you design a framework for managing risk, you need to examine and understand its external and internal context. Now, what's the meaning of external context? External context means that what are the external issues that may impact you from achieving your purpose, when achieving your intended outcome or achieving the strategic objectives of your organization. So, when you're examining the organization's or your organization's external context, it should consider the following: A, B, C, D, E. Please read. So when you're looking at the external context, you look at what are social issues, what are cultural issues, what are political issues, what could be legal issues, regulatory issues, financial issues, technological issues, environmental factors, whether they are international, national, or regional. I have to consider. So the short form of the first one is called PESEL. Okay. The short form acronym for this is called PESEL: political, economical, social, technological, legal, LE, economical. Okay. PESTLE, PESEL. Then another point which you need to look at it from the external context perspective is what are your key drivers and trends affecting the objective of the organization. So next, what is your contractual relationship and commitments? What is the impact to your organization if you fail to meet contractual relationships and commitments? SLA is not being met. Okay, quality of service not being there. Then things of that system not available. Then what is the complexity of networks and dependencies? That means what is your supply chain? What are your dependencies? So this third party and dependencies come here. What are your internal dependencies? What are expense? How complex is your network? So it's a global organization. There are so many organizations which are partners. Now, what happens if the partners fail to provide the service and if there is a risk there? So their risk is going to impact us and our risk is going to impact them. So this is what you have to consider when you are looking at determining or examining the organization's external context in achieving the objectives of your organization. Is it clear to everybody what could be the external context? Now look at what could be the internal context. When you are examining the internal context, these are the few things to be seen. Take a minute to read these 10 points. So what could be the issue? Examining the organization's internal context may include vision, mission, and values. So what could be the issue here? What could be the issue here? What do you think? So when we are establishing or designing a framework, we must ensure, and that is why we apply those 8 principles. We apply those 8 principles so that we can achieve the vision, mission, and values. Now, what happens if the vision, mission, and values is not clear? It is not understood, it is not communicated, then that becomes an issue itself. Then how will you achieve? You do not know what is the purpose of your organization. You do not know what are values in your organization. So that is going to impact your culture. Everybody will do what they feel is right. Okay, you do not have any ethical methods. People are not professional. Anti-bribery is prevalent in your company. So all these are going to be issues. Values. Mission is not clearly stated. Vision is not clearly stated. Okay, that can become an issue. So we have to address that. Okay. Second point, governance, organization structure, roles, and accountability. What could be the issue here? There is lack of clear direction, lack of commitment, there is lack of sponsorship. Neither the governance is providing direction, nor they are trying to monitor, nor they're involving themselves in risk. They do not. So if there is a poor reporting mechanism of the top 10 risks, then that risk will remain. Do not want to understand. They don't want to. They are not
Yes.
involved. They do not ask for any reports. They do not want to provide any action items. Okay. So this is an internal issue. Then strategy, objectives, and policies. Now, what could be the risk here, or what could be the issue here? Strategy, objectives, and policies. You have chosen a strategy which is not aligned to achieve the vision of your organization. See, strategy should be such that it should help you or provide confidence to achieve the vision of your organization. So mission is saying something else, your strategy is saying something else. And the strategy, you have only chosen one strategy. What happens if your strategy does not work? Then from the strategy, you derive your objectives. So achieve the strategy one, I have got objective one, objective. Now, what is the risk in the strategy which you have chosen? What is the risk in the objectives, operational objectives derived from the strategy? What are the policies, procedures in place? So there is no policy procedures. There, the objectives are not did not consider the risk. The strategy determination did not consider the risk in achieving this objective. So all these are internal issues. Then if everything is wrong, strategy is wrong, objectives are not did not take into consideration the risk, the policies are not clearly providing direction on the risk appetite, what is supposed to be done, then this is management structure weakness. This has to be addressed. Is it clear, everybody? Okay. Read the next point. Standards, guidelines, and models adopted by the organization. So what are the various standards which are applicable? This could be ISO standards, it could be industry specific standards, it could be regulations, it could be models. So what are the models? What are the standards? Do those standards take into consideration, or do those standards help in achieving the objective of your organization? Then when we're looking at the next bullet, take a minute to read. So this is talking about what are your capabilities in terms of capital. What is your capital asset? What are time constraints? What are people issues? What are intellectual property issues? What are the processes, systems, technology? What are the issues in capital management, time management, people, intellectual property, lack of processes, systems, and technologies? So, what is your capability in terms of resources and knowledge? How are you managing your knowledge? Knowledge related to the lagging risk in the risk indicators, future risk, the theft, the latest thefts which may be happening. What is the trend of the hackers? Okay, all these are issues. Then next issue is internal issue related to data, information systems, and information flow. So how are you managing the confidentiality, integrity in data? How are you looking at data as an asset? How are you classifying data? What are your information systems? How are secure are the information systems? What is your information flow diagrams? How is the information flowing? Are the risk in information flow being considered? All these are internal issues. Now, again, this relationship with internal stakeholders, and we looked at the relationship with external stakeholders, becomes an external issue. Relationship with internal stakeholders. Who are internal stakeholders? Yeah, employees, management, top management, people who are responsible to implement it, legal guys, financial guys, they are all integral stakeholders, IT guys, taking into account their perception and values. What is their perception about risk? What are their values? Are they being consulted? Then internal issue again relates to contractual relationships and commitment. We saw contractual relationships and commitment as an external issue, contractual relationship and commitments as an external issue. Internal issue. It is common. Internally, the issue is that we fail to meet contractual relationship. Okay. External issue is that when we are going into dependencies and when we are going to third party, have we taken into consideration the SLAs and the contracts and the MSAs? Does it include security as inbuilt into it? Then last but not the least, interdependencies and interconnection. Even internally, if you are doing process one, the process one may be interdependent on process P-1 and P+1. So if you're looking at dependencies, internal dependencies, you're dependent on HR for some aspects, you're dependent on IT for some aspect, you're dependent on budget for financial people, you're dependent on physical security with the facility guys. So there are a lot of internal dependencies and interconnections. So what could be those issues which are impacting you from achieving your mission or your strategic objectives? So I hope you understood how to determine internal issues and external issues. Is it clear to everybody? Please raise your hands. This is the most important point when you're designing the risk management framework. We had left at the internal issues. Now we will go to the implementation. Let us go to the standard. We had covered up to this. Before we continue, let us see how to articulate the risk management commitment. Please take a minute to read 5.4.2. Everybody, please read 5.4.2. So, one of the first requirements is that when you are going to implement the guidelines of the standard in your organization, you need to provide an evidence of how do you demonstrate or articulate risk management commitment. Now, this risk management commitment articulation can be in the form of a policy, or risk management policy, or another statement, or any other form that clearly conveys what are the organization's objectives and commitment to risk management. So, what is the purpose? Why have you established a risk management framework? What is the results you want to achieve? What is the commitment that you have made towards the risk management framework? Now, this commitment should include the following: A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In fact, it is more here, 8 and 9, up to 8. Okay. Now, the first commitment which they need from the top management oversight body is this. First commitment is that your statement of risk management framework or your risk management policy should include what is the purpose of establishing a risk management framework. How does this risk management framework link with achieving the strategic objectives of your organization and other policies? That's the first thing. So if you are reviewing your risk management policy, it should include what is the purpose of risk management or managing risk, and how does it link in achieving the purpose of the organization. That's the first thing. Then, does the policy include a commitment to reinforce the need to integrate risk management into the overall culture of the organization? So, what is your statement or commitment to ensure that everybody in the organization, principle of inclusiveness, principle of human factors and culture, how do you motivate people to contribute? How have you assigned roles and responsibilities? How do you take their views and perceptions into consideration when identifying risk or taking decisions? Then the next commitment is, how do you provide a commitment by ensuring the integration of risk management into the core business activities and decision making? So, what are the core business activities? Okay, so you may be into engagements, client services, products, services. So, there are many core processes. How have you integrated risk management into those core functions, business activities, and decision making? So decision making is, what is the risk in this particular process? What decision you have taken to mitigate the risk? Have you taken a decision to accept the risk, transfer the risk, mitigate the risk, accept the risk? Or are you going ahead with this activity? Maybe some strategy is going to not meet the purpose of your organization. So have you dropped that function, activity, etc.? Then, does your commitment include assignment of authorities, responsibilities, and accountability? So, what is the authority, accountability, and responsibility of the top management, the board of directors, steering committee, risk and management committee, CHO, CISO, CRO, then the vertical heads? functional heads. Okay. Then have you made sure that the necessary resources which are required to implement or establish the framework have been provided? Resources in terms of what are the processes? Have you established a risk assessment process which can be consistently applied across all the functions? Have you determined what is the training skill set required? What is the budget required? What is the time required to implement this particular project? Okay, those are the some tools, automation tools which may be required. Okay, now this is a very interesting point. How have you provided the commitment to show the commitment should include the way in which conflicting objectives are dealt with. Now, what are conflicting objectives? Every function, every engagement, every activity will have different objectives. Now, when the objectives are conflicting, which one is going to take priority? So conflicting objectives are dealt with. So normally you have a conflict resolution committee. So if the HR is saying something, IT is saying something, and business is saying something, which are all different and they are all conflicting objectives and views and perceptions, ultimately, who's going to take a decision? Now, this is a very practical point in most organizations. So, do you have a conflict resolution committee? How the conflicting objectives are going to be dealt with? So, that should be included as a risk management commitment through a policy statement or any other form. Okay. Then a commitment for ensuring measurement and reporting. Now, measurement will be against your KPI. So, what are your key performance indicators? How are you measuring the achievement of your key performance indicators, taking into consideration the risk indicators? What is your policy on reporting within the organization's performance indicators? So, measurement against the risk indicators and comparing with them with the performance indicators. So, KPIs versus KRIs. So, this should be form a part of the commitment as a policy. And then, what is the policy procedure to review and improve the risk management framework? Now, this risk management commitment in the form of a policy should be communicated within an organization and to stakeholders as relevant. Okay. Is there any point in this clause 5.4.2? Anybody? Take a minute to read 5.4.3. So, very clearly, you should articulate and bring out what are the authorities, responsibilities, and accountabilities for various roles. So, how many roles have you created? What is the authority, responsibility, and accountability of each role with respect to risk management? How have you communicated these roles and have you created these roles at all levels? Communicated at all levels, are assigned and communicated at all levels of the organization. So, first thing is that the roles and responsibilities should emphasize that risk management is a core responsibility. So, if you are the vertical head for account A, then risk management for account A is your core responsibility. The global head for HR, then the risk related to HR becomes the core responsibility of the HR head. Then you also need to identify individuals who have accountability and authority to manage risk. So, what is your policy criteria to determine who are the risk owners? What is the authority of the risk owners? How the risk owners manage the risk within their own functions, activity, department, etc. So, this is a very, very important function. Unless and until you assign roles, responsibilities, and authorities, nobody will know. One will think that the other person will do it, the other person will think it is your job, and then nobody will do it. So then accountability. So if something happens, then whom are you going to make accountable and whom are you going to make responsible for that lapse? So if you do not give the organization from a risk management, so even in the day-to-day working, even in the day-to-day working, you have assigned roles, responsibility, authority. Along with the same roles and responsibility accountabilities, you have to include a additional role to say that risk management is a core responsibility along with the existing role which you have. Okay, that is how you will practically implement it in your organization. Now, please read 5.4.4. So, when we are looking at allocating the roles, the resources, the first and foremost resource is people, their skills, their experience, and the competency. So, suppose you have assigned a role to the IT manager that you are responsible for the risk assessment for your own IT function. But then, how did you ensure that this particular person whom you've given the role is competent on the base of experience, skills, and training? So you have to, unless you provide them competency in terms of training and ensure that they enhance their skills to manage the risk, how can it be automatically done? Then you need resources for managing risk in terms of processes. So what is your process for risk assessment, your process for risk treatment, your process for monitoring, your process for reporting? Then what are the tools you are using? So RSA is one of the tools. Many organizations use many tools to do the risk assessment for managing risk. Then what are the documented processes and procedures? So what is your documented procedure for consistency in managing risk? So do you have a risk assessment process? Do you have a process for risk treatment plan? Do you have a process for monitoring? Do you have a process for reporting? Do you have a process for recording and reporting the risk, high top right risk to the organization? Okay. Then one of the most important resource is information and knowledge management system. So how do you keep abreast of what are the latest threats and vulnerabilities to your organization from an application security perspective, information security perspective, competition perspective, environmental perspective? So there is a carbon footprint, there is an energy management, all these green, go green, all these are aspects which will impact you from achieving your objectives if you do not take into consideration how you are managing the legal regulatory requirements or environmental requirements which is related, which is impacting your organization from achieving the objective. Then how have you identified what are the training needs for professional development for managing risk? So you need to consider what are your capabilities and what are your constraints. That means do a SWOT analysis. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses related to threats and opportunities? Okay. Okay. Any question related to 5.4.4? Now we will read 5.5, 5.4.5. Please, everybody, go read it. So another requirement or commitment from the top management is establishing communication and consultation. Now, what is the meaning of communication and consultation? Here we apply the principle of inclusiveness. So, what is your policy or approach? So, you need to establish an approach to communicate and consult. The communication is something different, consultation is different. Okay, communication means how do you share information with various stakeholders within your organization? How do you communicate or share information? Consultation means how do you seek participants providing feedback, their expectation? How do you leverage on their views, their expertise, so that decisions can be taken? So, communication and consultation methods and content should reflect the expectation of stakeholders where relevant. That means if you are looking at communication and consultation from achieving the business objective, so what are the views of the business heads? If you're looking at communication consultation related to the IT infrastructure and how that impacts the business, then that will relate how the financial risks. How do you communicate and seek the views of various stakeholders in looking at the financial risks? Okay, things of that nature. So this communication and consultation, when you create or write a paper or write a policy or write an approach, should be that this communication and consultation should be in a timely manner. So you should ensure that this communication consultation takes place before the risk management and as an ongoing process, so that when we are going to adopt a communication consultation approach, how do you collect this information? How do you collate this information? How do you synthesize this information and then share it as appropriate? So it is not a that garbage in, garbage out. You have to then do a lot of filtering of what is the information, what are the views that you collected. Some may be valid, some may not be valid. And then how do you, after consolidation, how do you share this information and provide feedback to your various stakeholders? So this establishing communication and consultation approach is a very, very important consideration when you're going to establish a framework for managing risk. We will be looking at communication and consultation aspect even when we are doing the risk management process. Okay. So what is the first point to consider? How do you plan to implement the risk management framework in your organization? So first and foremost is that when you're thinking of implementing the risk management framework which you have designed in your organization, you will consider development of an appropriate project plan. Okay, you can use Microsoft project plan. Now that project plan should include what is the time frame you have considered to implement the framework. Is it 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? What are the resources required in terms of budget, people, processes, technology? Then when you are going to implement this framework, you need to identify where, when, and how different types of decisions are made across the organization and by whom. So, who are your core decision makers? So, look, you're looking at mergers and demergers, when you're looking at buying new technology, when you're looking at new engagements, when you're looking at RFPs. So, where are the decisions taken? When you're looking at third party engagements. So, identifying where, when, and how different types of decisions are taken. So, how do you take a decision to give a contract? How do you take a decision to go for mergers and demergers? How do you take a decision to buy new technology? So, all these are decision points. So, where, when, and how different types of decisions are taken across the organization and by whom. So the risk management framework should be implemented there. So before they take a decision, they should consider the risk which is involved in taking that decision. Now, somewhere you may need to modify the applicable decision making process when necessary. For example, if you are if you have been taking a decision to outsource certain activities without a formal risk assessment, then you need to ensure that the third party engagement does not happen without a proper risk management being conducted or risk assessment being conducted based on the risk management framework which we have now implemented. Then, when you are implementing this particular framework, ensuring that the organization's arrangement for managing risk are clearly understood and practiced. What are the arrangements which you have made? That what is your risk appetite? What are the resources required? What are the procedures which are there? What are the tools which are there? So all these arrangements are included and made available and practiced wherever you are implementing the risk management framework based on your plan. Now, please read this paragraph. So, if you cannot effectively implement the risk management framework without the engagement and involvement and awareness of various stakeholders. It could be internal stakeholders, it could be external stakeholders. So, when you involve your various stakeholders during the implementation phase of the framework, this will ensure that you explicitly address the uncertainty in decision making, and then you're taking that consideration of uncertainty. For example, if you're looking at third party engagement, so what are the risks related to third party engagement? Has it been explicitly considered before taking a decision for engagement with the third party? Or you're buying new technology, so have you considered the engagement of all the IT people and the business to see how the new technology is going to impact you before taking a decision? Or you want to outsource your processes to the cloud service provider, then before taking a decision, have you involved all the stakeholders before implementing or transferring the strategy or process for outsourcing on the cloud service? And then last, read the last paragraph. Okay, any questions here? Anybody? Okay. Now we can go through the slides. Take a minute to go through the slide. I've already covered in great detail. Then I will analyze the risk, then I will evaluate the risk. The output of the risk assessment will act as an input to my risk treatment. Now, even if you see on the right hand side, at each stage, we will have a policy process to monitor and review as to how effectively this particular process is working and where we need to change, because we will apply the principle of dynamic. So the criteria may change, the context may change, the risk identification, some may change, some new ones may come. We analyze the risk, maybe some controls are not working effectively, so the likelihood will go up, the impact will go up, the evaluation criteria may change, and the risk treatment, we will monitor how effectively are the risks being mitigated as per the risk treatment plan. So monitoring and review will be also applicable at each and every stage of the risk management process. And then at each stage, we will decide what needs to be recorded and what needs to be reported to whom. So this is the concept, this is the process which we apply across the organization for each and every risk assessment which we do in an organization. So we will follow a systematic and consistent and comprehensive approach for managing risk based on this process. Is it clear to everybody? Okay, we will go into details of each of these steps as we go along. But has the concept been understood by everybody? Okay, so this is what we are going to study today. So this is the process. So this process should be an integral part of management. So whether we are looking at governance, whether we are looking at function A, whether we're looking at activity B, whether we're looking at strategic level, tactical level, it will be an integral part of the management. And this particular process can be applied at all levels and all functions and all activities. The only thing is that we need to customize this process in the context of what we are in, what is the context in which we are doing the risk assessment. And lastly, this process appears to be sequential, but it is not sequential. It is iterative. So if I'm not clear on I will, when I'm doing monitoring and review and I'm using the communication consultation approach, I may find that I have missed out certain risk. So I will go back to the risk identification or analysis, or I can go back to the scope. So it's an iterative process. It's a cyclical process. Okay. Now please read this paragraph just as a summary of what I have already told you. So the first thing I told you is that the risk management process should be a integral part. What does it mean? Integral part of management and wherever decisions are taken and integrated into the org structure. So what is your organization structure? What is the hierarchy? What are the functions? Okay, what are the divisions? And it will be integrated into the org structure. That means HR, finance, facility, IT, everybody will be, risk management will be integrated into all functions. Then whatever operations you are doing, whatever your delivery you are doing, whatever processes you are doing. So in nutshell, the risk management will be integrated to all, will be an integral part of all the activities, processes, functions which you do to achieve the purpose of your organization. Why do you exist? What are the processes you do to deliver product and services? So risk management will be an integral part. Now we can apply this risk management process at the strategic level when we're taking decisions for mergers and demergers or deviation, or into all the operationals, wherever we are having operations, wherever we are operating, or in whatever programs we have created. Okay, project programs and the project levels. So it can be applied at the program level, project level, strategic level, operational level, tactical level, everywhere, or wherever. Now, read the second paragraph. Now, the second paragraph is very important. When we apply this risk management process, we need to customize this process in the context of achieving the objective. So what is the objective from information security perspective? Preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What is the objective from occupational health, health and safety of the employees in my organization? What is the objective of doing risk assessment from quality perspective to ensure that quality products are delivered? What is the objective when we are doing the risk assessment from GDPR perspective? How do we meet the regulatory requirements of GDPR and preserving the PII of my customers, client, and employees? So you can apply it. Now the external and internal context will change. So whatever the internal issues and external issues from ISMS will differ from BCMS, will differ for quality, will differ from some other. Some may be common, some will be different. So we will try to achieve the objective. What is the results you want to achieve by conducting this risk assessment? What are internal issues specific to this objective? What are external issues specific to this objective? What are legal regulatory requirements specific to this objective? So you customize the risk management process in the context in which you want to achieve the objective, taking into consideration what are the requirements of interested parties, legal requirements, regulatory requirements, contractual requirements, internal issues, external will be different for different processes. So you have to customize it in the context in which you're doing the risk assessment. Then the dynamic and variable nature of human behavior and culture. So if you do not have a culture, if you have not educated your people, if the people are not motivated, if they're not innovating, if they're not skilled, if they're not trained, then that will itself will become a risk. So the dynamic and variable nature of human behavior and culture should be considered throughout the risk management process. So what happens if the people are not contributing? They are not sensitive. They are not motivated to provide their advice. They do not share information. They do not want to engage this in this risk management. Then that is a serious issue from a human aspect or a culture perspective. And read the last line which I told you. Although the risk management process is often presented as sequential, in practice it is iterative. So at any point in time you can go back. So it is an iterative process from continual improvement perspective. Okay. Any questions in the generic part of the risk management process? Now, now look at the communication and consultation approach. Clause 6.2. So, what is the main purpose of communication and consultation? So, the main purpose of communication and consultation is involvement of relevant stakeholders. So, it could be customers, it could be clients, it could be employees, it could be the different departments. So, everybody who is involved into a particular area, a particular process, a particular function, they should understand what is the risk they are facing and what is the basis on which decisions are made. Are you ready to accept this risk? You will take a decision. I accept it, or no, I don't accept it. So I will mitigate this risk, or I will transfer the risk. And the reason why a particular action is required. Why do I want to mitigate this risk? Because this is going to impact me from achieving my strategic objectives. So everything should be related to how not mitigating this risk or not addressing this, how it is going to impact me from achieving my objectives. So we have to link the dots. By addressing the risk, this will help me to achieve my objective. So when we are providing a communication consultation approach, we are trying to seek, we are trying to firstly share this information with all the relevant stakeholders who are going to be involved in this particular area and take their views, their perceptions, their expertise. That's the purpose. So as I mentioned yesterday, communication seeks to promote awareness and understanding. Okay, so we share this information. Whereas consultation involves obtaining feedback and information to support decision making. So we need feedback. We need, okay, what should be the controls? What is the probability that this will happen? What has been the impact? Have these incidents happened earlier? What were the controls which are there? What are the criteria for accepting risk? How much risk we are ready to accept? All these decisions are taken. So when we are, what is the residual risk we are ready to take? We have to take a decision. What is the option I've chosen to mitigate the risk? What are the controls? Are the controls cost effective? When what timeline we need to put it? All these decisions have to be taken involving all the relevant stakeholders in the context in which I'm doing the risk assessment. So close coordination between the two should facilitate factual, timely, relevant, accurate, and understandable exchange of information. So whatever information we are seeking from various stakeholders as feedback and providing to them should be done in a timely manner. It should be factual, not based on hypothesis, accurate and clear. Everybody should understand. And when we are seeking this information, please take into account the confidentiality and integrity as well as privacy rights of individuals. So this information needs to be protected. There may be very sensitive information and the accuracy of this information, if it is not accurate, if the information itself is not accurate, you take wrong decisions. And sometimes this may involve the privacy rights. So this may involve the PII information of certain individuals. So how are we protecting this information when we are applying the process of communication and consultation? Then read this paragraph. Now, this communication and consultation with appropriate stakeholders, both internal and external, should take place within and throughout all the steps. What does it mean? We will use this process of communication consultation to determine the scope, criteria, context of the organization. We will use this approach for identifying risk. We will use this approach to determine the likelihood and impact of the risk. We will use this approach for evaluating the risk. We will use this approach to take a decision which risk needs to be mitigated, which needs to be transferred. So we will apply it at all stages. And what is the purpose and what is the objective and the end result of communication is these 3 points or 4 points rather. Take a minute to read these 3 bullets. There's another fourth one on the next page, which I will show you just now. Okay. So the objective of communication and consultation firstly is to ensure that we bring different areas of expertise together for each step of the risk management. Then ensure that different views are appropriately considered when defining the risk criteria and when evaluating the risk. Now, very important. So we should ensure that when we are establishing the criteria means what is your criteria to determine the impact of the risk? What is the criteria to determine the likelihood? What is the criteria to conduct the risk assessment? What is your criteria to accept the risk? Then, when we are evaluating the risk, we compare the risk value with the criteria. So, should we evaluate it as high, low, or medium? If it is high, then what mitigation strategies we should choose? So, we need to communicate and consult with everybody who's involved in the risk assessment so that we can take an informed decision. So, this particular communication and consultation approach will provide us with enough information to facilitate risk oversight and decision making. Even the top management will understand, okay, we have taken a decision to mitigate this risk. We'll put these controls. This is the budget. This is timeline. So they will know what is the purpose and what is the impact if we do not do. So it will help them to take a decision. Okay. And last is this: build a sense of inclusiveness and ownership among those affected by risk. So we looked at principle of inclusiveness. We looked at cultural issues. We looked at human factors. So if you will involve everybody, then the sense of ownership will go up. They will all be motivated to contribute and feel a sense of ownership, which is a very important aspect from a cultural and human behavior perspective. Are we clear so far on this communication and consultation approach? Everybody? All right. So take a minute to go through the slide. This is what is summary of what we have discussed so far. Okay. Next, we come to scope, context, and criteria. Again, let us go through the standard. Take a minute to read the scope, context, and criteria 6.3. Okay. So, what is the purpose of establishing the scope, context, and criteria? So, the purpose of establishing the scope, the context, and the criteria is that we need to customize this risk management process, enabling effective risk assessment and appropriate risk treatment. So, what is the objective? What is the results to be achieved at the end of the risk management process? For risk management process, you can consider as a risk assessment process. Okay, loosely speaking, because risk assessment is only part of the management process. So, what is the objective after conducting, or what is the objective of this risk management process? So, we need to customize the scope. Customizing of the scope means, are we doing this for at the strategic level? Are we doing it at the tactical level? Are we doing it at a functional level? Are we doing it for information security perspective? What is the scope? Then, depending on the scope, suppose the scope is related to ISMS and at the global level, at the strategic level, then the context will change. The internal and external issues related to the ISMS at the global level from a strategic perspective will be different than doing an ISMS from, let's say, one customer MSA perspective. Will be different. Then what is the criteria? What is the criteria to accept the risk? What is the criteria for determining the likelihood of the risk? What is the criteria to determine the when will we do the risk assessment? So each the scope, context, and criteria will be customized in the context in which we are trying to do the risk assessment. Okay. When we define the scope, what is the considerations to be taken in? What considerations we should be looking at? So the organization should define the scope of its risk management activities. Please read this paragraph. So there are three things to be considered. Firstly, what is the level at which we are doing this risk management? Are we applying it at the strategic, operational, program, project, or an activity level. Once we do that, once we are clear about the scope under consideration, what is the objective of doing this risk assessment and how does this objective align with the organization's objective? So this linking the dots is the most important thing before we start the risk management process. So again, as I mentioned, we customize this risk management process in the context of achieving the objective and how this particular objective under scope relates with the organizational objective. So linking the dots. So all the risk assessment we understood on day one. The purpose of conducting a risk assessment or risk management is to achieve the organization's objectives, to achieve the mission, vision, goals of the organization. So there is an interrelationship. You cannot be looking at it at silos. Okay. Now, when planning the approach of defining the scope, what needs to be considered? The following things needs to be considered. A, B, C, D, E. Take a minute to read. Okay. So the main considerations when planning to establish the scope of the risk management process is the consideration should include what is the objective. Objective means what is the results to be achieved. Okay, and what are the decisions that need to be made. Then what is the outcomes expected from each step to be taken in the process. So what is the outcome from the risk assessment, identification, analysis, evaluation? Then what is the time period? What is the time period? What are the locations which are in scope? What are the specific inclusions and what are the specific exclusions? So which part of the organization, which activity, which function, what are the timelines? Then what is the appropriate risk assessment tools? For example, when we're looking at communication consultation approach, we can apply a brainstorming technique. When we're looking at an analysis of the risk, we can look at the five whys. Okay, what can happen, why, where, and how. So we can have different techniques for conducting the risk assessment. And what are the tools which we need? So we may have automated tools, things of that nature. Then we also need to determine, okay, depending on the scope, what will be the resources required, who are going to be responsible for what, and what are the records to be kept at each stage. So you'll have to record the scope, you'll have to record the internal context, you'll have to record the external context, you'll have to record the so you'll record everything at each and every step. You'll record the criteria for accepting risk and who all has approved it, whom all were consulted. So records to be kept at each stage. Then last and not the least, what is the relationship of this particular risk management process with other processes? So this particular process may be related to another 10 processes. Okay, so I'm looking at a project, I'm looking at a third party risk management. So they may be related to other projects as well. So this particular risk management may be related with other projects, other processes, and so your internal activities, internal dependencies, external dependencies, all these need to be taken into consideration when we're defining the scope of the risk management. Any questions so far? Okay. Now read external and internal context. I'm ensuring that you read each and every page of the standard so that you don't miss out anything. What do we understand by internal and external context? So what is given here is that what is the internal constraints? What are the external value issues? So we can call it factors, issues, whatever. So what are the internal factors? For example, lack of budget, people are not trained, poor organization structure, policy processes do not exist. These are internal issues or internal context. The external context is varying legal regulatory requirements, competition, regulatory requirements not met, okay, SLA is not met. So those are all external issues, political issues, environmental issues, technological issues. So what are these issues which are impacting me from achieving my objective? So we need to define these issues. Only when you define these issues, then you will take some action on it. So unless and until you address these issues, how will you be able to achieve the objective? Now, the only thing is that the issues will differ. Even determination of these issues will be relevant to the context in which you're doing the risk assessment. The issues which are going to be relevant from information security will be different from business continuity, will be different for quality, will be different for anti-bribery, etc., etc. Now read the second paragraph. So firstly, we will understand what are the internal external issues at the management level, at the organization level, and out of that, what are specific to this particular process in which I'm applying the risk assessment. So you will filter out, okay? And why is understanding the context important? A, B, and C. So basically, when we are looking at risk management takes into consideration what is the objective of the organization and what are the activities we are doing. So risk is inherent in all the activities and all. So whatever we objective, each and every objective has inherent risk. Each and activity which we do has inherent risk. So what could be the issues which are causing this risk? Now, organization factors can be a source of risk. What are organizational factors? Lack of budget, lack of processes, lack of poor culture, no direction from oversight body. Okay, attitude of people. These could be organizational factors. They will give rise to risk. And these are related with achieving the overall objective of the organization. The organization should establish the external context and the risk management process by considering the factors mentioned in 5.4.1. So when we're looking at the process, when we're looking at external context, we'll use the acronym PESL. When we're looking at internal context, we'll again look at all these factors. So in nutshell, what I'm saying is, for each and every process, what are the specific external issues related to the risk process which I'm applying now? What are the internal issues or internal context which is applicable to this particular process? So we will again refer to the clause 5.4.1 when we are considering the internal issues and external issues related to this particular process. I hope this relationship is clear to everybody. Is it clear so far, everybody? All right. Then we come to the most important aspect, the third aspect, which is related to defining the risk criteria. Take a minute to read. So the purpose of defining the risk criteria is that I should be very clear in my mind. So we should be able to specify what is the and type, amount and type of risk that I may take to achieve my objective or that I may not take relative to the objective. So whatever was my objective, which I have defined in the scope, what is the amount and type of risk I'm ready to take, and what is the amount and type of risk I'm not yet ready to take. For example, I have zero tolerance for non-compliance to GDPR. I may have an appetite of having a revenue loss of 0.05%. So I'm very clear in my mind what is the amount of risk I'm ready to take and what is the amount and type of risk I'm not ready to take. Okay, now read the second line. Now, very important is, and this is where I will use the communication consultation approach. I will seek the views of various stakeholders to understand what is my criteria to evaluate the significance of the risk. So, how do I decide, is the risk value high, low, medium, very high, catastrophic? On what basis do I say this risk is catastrophic and I cannot accept, so that I can take a decision? If this risk is within my appetite, do nothing. If this risk is not within my appetite, how do I come to know whether this risk, what is the significance of the risk? What is the criteria to evaluate the significance of the risk and to support decision? My decision is, should I accept the risk? Should I mitigate the risk? Should I transfer the risk? That is decision I have to take. Then the risk criteria should be aligned with the risk management framework and customized to the specific purpose, scope of the activity. So the risk criteria for activity one, program one, project one will be different than the risk criteria for a different objective or a different context. Now, the risk criteria should also reflect the organization's values. So, what are your values? Being ethical, being doing things in an ethical manner, professional manner, not taking bribes, providing quality products. Objectives, what are your organization objectives? And the resources. Now, you may want to have zero tolerance, but do you have resources for zero tolerance? And be consistent with the policies and statements. Now, read this paragraph. Now, one of the another criteria when we are considering the risk criteria is, do we take into consideration the organization's obligations and views of stakeholders? What are my obligations? I may have legal obligations, I may have contractual obligations, I may have my own internal values, and I must seek the views of my stakeholders. So I cannot define the criteria alone. So I will follow the communication and consultation approach to seek the views of various stakeholders who are relevant in this particular process. Then, while the risk criteria should be established at the beginning of the risk assessment, but they are dynamic, because what is the criteria today may change tomorrow and should be continually reviewed and amended if necessary. Now, when we set the risk criteria, what are the specific things to be taken into consideration? Now, this particular slide is very, very important. This particular paragraph is very, very, take 5 minutes to read. So suppose you have to decide, you have to determine the risk criteria. What is the consideration? Okay, so first consideration is, what is the nature and type of uncertainty? What are the deviations from the expected? What are the events that can happen? Some will be tangible and some will be intangible. Intangible ones are related to reputation. Loss of reputation is intangible. Okay, so there could be an uncertainty which will impact the reputation of an organization, maybe because of bribery, because of unethical methods, because of the customer satisfaction, dissatisfaction, legal requirements not being met. Okay, timely response not done, welfare of people not taken into consideration. These are all intangibles. Then what is the criteria to determine the consequences, both positive and negative? So if it's a positive consequence, we have seen it is an opportunity. If it's a negative one, it's a risk. So what is the criteria to say that this consequence is low, medium, high? What is the criteria to say this particular likelihood is low, medium, high? Will be defined and measured. Then time related factors. Okay. What is the meaning of time related factors? How much time do I need to mitigate this risk? What is the criteria? So if it is a high risk, the timeline should be given. Similarly, when I'm doing a business impact analysis, so that is where time comes into a great consideration. What is the impact of a disruption within the first 30 minutes? What is the impact of disruption within the first 1 hour? What is the impact of the disruption within the next 2 hours? So what should be my timeline to recover this activity. So that is where time criteria for determining the time, the impact of a disruption taken over a period of time. That is also one of the consideration when we determine the risk criteria. Then consistency in the use of measurement. So when we establish the criteria, whether person A is doing the risk assessment or person B is doing the risk assessment, they will follow a consistent and comparable result. So if we say that $50,000 and less is acceptable risk to me, then whether A does it or B does it, both will say it is a low risk. The measurement will come to equal to low. Then what is your criteria to determine the level of the risk? Normally, we determine the level of the risk by taking a product of what is the likelihood and what is the impact. If the likelihood is less and the impact is less, obviously the risk value will be less. If the likelihood is more and the impact is more, then obviously the level of the risk will be high. Then how combination and sequence of multiple risks. Now one risk has given rise to another risk. Now which one is going to be prioritized? And what is the organization's capacity? What are your resources required? What is your capability? Because the risk assessment or the risk evaluation or the risk treatment plans should be cost effective. So we cannot be looking at a mitigation strategy which is not going to be cost effective. Now we will understand how to conduct a risk assessment. Risk assessment consists of these three steps: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. What is the purpose of each one of these processes? We will understand now. Okay. Right. Take a minute to read risk assessment. What is the purpose of risk assessment, or what does risk assessment involve? Please read this first statement. So, as I mentioned to you, risk assessment consists of three processes: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. What each one of these processes or stages or steps has a very distinct purpose. What do we do in risk identification? What do we do in risk analysis? And what do we do in risk evaluation? We will go into greater. Now, read the second paragraph. Now, one of the most important considerations when we are going to conduct risk assessment is that it should follow a structured and systematic approach, which is iterative and which is takes into consideration the views and knowledge of stakeholders. So we apply the principle of inclusiveness here. We apply the principle of systematic and structured approach to collaboratively, and we apply the principle of best available knowledge. If you do not have knowledge as to what can go wrong, why and where, if you do not have knowledge what is going to be the impact of the risk, if you do not have knowledge on what is going to be the likelihood, if you do not have the criteria to determine what is going to be, then we cannot start. Okay. Okay. Now let us look at what is the first step. The first step in risk assessment is risk identification. Now, what is the purpose of risk identification? It is given on the first line. Very important. This you must remember and you must keep it at the back of your mind. Please read it twice. What is the purpose of risk identification? So the purpose of risk identification is firstly to find what can go wrong, then recognize whether this is applicable to me. So find, recognize, and describe risk. Now, when we are looking at risk identification, we will remember the definition of effect of uncertainty on objectives. So this effect of uncertainty, when we're looking at finding, recognizing, and describing risk, either this will help me to achieve my objectives or it will prevent me. If this risk which I've identified is helping me to achieve my objective, then it becomes an opportunity. If this risk is preventing me from achieving my objective, then it becomes a negative risk. That means the effect of this risk, of this uncertainty, is negative. Okay. Most important, relevant, appropriate, and up-to-date information is important in identifying a risk. where did I get to know that this uncertainty could happen? So where did I get this information from? What is the quality of this information? Is it accurate? What was the source of this information? That is very important. Okay. Then read the next paragraph. Now, how do we come to know? What is the technique we can use to identify what are the uncertainties that may affect one or more objectives? So we can follow a brainstorming methodology. We can call various stakeholders and find out, okay, what do you think are the uncertainties in meeting this objective? So each one will give their past history or give their own perception. So you will get all this information through a communication consultation approach. But then what are the factors and what is the relationship between these factors which needs to be considered when I'm doing risk identification is very, very important. Firstly, what is the tangible and intangible sources of the risk? And as per the definition we saw yesterday, sources of the risk is what is the element which can give rise to risk. For example, fire is a source of risk. Unskilled person or incompetent person, human error is a source of risk. Okay, unprotected firewall is a source of risk. Okay, so what is the cause of the event? So what is the cause? What was the reason why this particular uncertainties happened? So we will, when it is a negative risk, we will look at threats. So what are the threats that can give rise? For example, weak firewall or somebody hacking or motivated employees taking away data, failure, the hardware failure, power supply. These are threats. And what are opportunities? Opportunities are the reverse. So if you've got a very mature risk assessment process, all your controls are working fine, you are better than the competitor. So these become opportunities. So when we are identifying risk, it is not necessary that we only look at the negative aspect. We should look at the positive aspects as well. So when we are looking at threats and opportunities, we are also looking at what are vulnerabilities. Because if you remember, there has to be a threat only when a threat exploits the vulnerability, it gives rise to risk. If there is no asset, then there is no risk. If there is no threat, there is no risk. If there is no vulnerability, there is no. So there has to be three components to identify the risk. There has to be a threat, there has to be a vulnerability, and there has to be an asset. So when you identify the risk, you must identify all these three things. What is the asset? What is the threat that has exploited the vulnerability which has given rise to the risk? Then another consideration is when you are identifying the risk is what are the changes in the external and in external context, internal and external context. So what has been the legal regulatory requirements which we have not updated? What are the MSAs and contractual requirements which we have not met? So they will give rise to risk. Then do I have knowledge and information of indicators of emerging risk? Indicators of emerging risk are your leading risk indicators. Now, how do you get this information? Now, there are various global organizations which publish what are the latest threats and vulnerabilities which are existing in an organization. So you have to subscribe to this particular knowledge. And some of them is given by the OEMs. Some of them are given by the application people who have developed the application. Some of them are given by the CERT India or various government agencies. So what are the latest threats and vulnerabilities? So what are the leading indicators? For example, we had case of ransomware and we had so many other threats which has happened on the organizations. Okay, phishing attacks, ransomware, SQL injections, many such things. Then another important consideration during the risk identification is what is the nature and value of assets and resources. So if this is a high, what is the meaning of asset? What is the definition of asset? Something of value. And what are the resources required for this asset? So only when this asset is of high value, for example, this is a sensitive, personally identified information. This is an asset. It is a customer information. It is an asset. It's a it's a server. the server is providing the services for payment industry. So that server becomes an important asset. Then we also have to consider what is going to be the consequences and their impact on objectives. So what is the definition of risk? Effect of uncertainty on objectives. So what is the effect of this uncertainty, or what is the effect of this consequences of this uncertainty, and how does it impact achieving the objectives? So effect of uncertainty on objectives. So consequences is, for example, loss of sensitive client data due to weak firewall. Okay, so loss of these client data is a consequence. Now, what is the impact? Resulting in legal penalties or resulting in not meeting resulting in non-compliance to GDPR regulation. So you have to completely describe the risk. Then when we are identifying the risk, we have to identify what are the limitations of knowledge and reliability of information. Very, very important. As somebody brought out in the morning. Now, I do not have any information of what is the risk. So I'm just a startup. So what is the limitation of this knowledge? I have based this knowledge on hearsay, or I'm basing this knowledge based on the surveys that have been published by the various global agencies. Then I also need to understand, when I'm doing risk assessment, time related factors. So what is the time? If this risk is not mitigated within a finite time, then what is going to be the impact to my achieving the objective? And last but not the least, when you are identifying the risk, you have to look at biases. Now, when you are going to follow a communication and consultation approach, everybody will have different opinions. There will be a different presumption. There will be different beliefs. So have you considered the beliefs, assumptions, and biases of those who are involved into the risk identification? Then read the last paragraph, very important. So when we are identifying the risk, sometimes the source of the risk may not be under our control. For example, when we're looking at flood, fire, the source of the risk may not be, environmental one. When we're looking at flood or when we're looking at earthquake, the source of the risk is not in our control. And we should also consider that there may be more than one type of outcome. So one risk can give rise to can impact many areas. Okay, which may result in a variety of tangible. For example, if there is a loss of client data or there is a loss of sensitive data, which may have legal impact, which may have financial impact, it may have customer dissatisfaction, it may have other impacts. So what are the variety of consequences which may happen because of an uncertainty which has happened by a threat exploiting a vulnerability? So when we are looking at identification of risk, look at the definition of risk. I will again take you through the definition of risk. This is the most important thing, and why I'm emphasizing so much is based on my experience. People just say fire, flood, hacking, loss of data, power supply. These are not risks. These are just some statements. So when we look at risk, take 5 minutes to go through the definition of risk, especially note 3. So when we identify the risk, we must identify what is the uncertainty, what is the effect of this uncertainty, and on which objectives get impacted. Is it a negative deviation or is it a positive deviation? Is this objective at a strategic level, tactical level, operational level, financial perspective? So risk is usually expressed in terms of what is the risk source, what was the event or the uncertainty, what were the consequences, and what is the likelihood. So there are 4 things which you must keep in mind when you describe the risk. What was the risk source? The element which has given rise to the risk. For example, fire or a disgruntled employee or unavailability of fire, the power supply, okay, power failure. And what is the consequence? So there are 4 things: risk sources, element which has given rise to risk, what is the potential event, describe the event, okay, what is the consequences, and what is the likelihood. So remember these 3.4, 3.5 when you describe the risk. I hope it is clear to everybody. Risk identification. Okay, firstly, if you want to review the risk, now it should you have to see which department, which function you are talking about. So suppose I'm looking at legal regulated risk, then I should involve the legal function. Now, at what frequency? At least once in 3 months. What are the latest risks? What are the future? What are the incidents that have happened? What are the high risk? What are the risk treatment plans in place? So involve all those people who are from that particular function or activity in reviewing the risk at least once in a quarter. And if it is high risk area, every month. And if it is looking at an engagement, then maybe every month you'll generate a report. So it all depends on what is the criticality of the event, or what is the criticality of the function, and what is the criticality of the data which you are identifying the risk, or reviewing the risk. Okay. So have you all understood the risk identification process? Remember the four things: risk source which has given rise to event, then what is the consequences and what is the likelihood. Okay. Then the next step in risk assessment is risk analysis. Now, please read what is the purpose of risk analysis. The purpose of risk identification is to find, recognize the risk. Find, recognize, and describe the risk. The purpose of risk analysis is to comprehend the nature of the risk and its characteristics, including where appropriate, what is the level of the risk. So, in risk analysis, we go into a detailed analysis. What is the nature of risk? What is the likelihood of the risk? What is the impact of the risk? Realistic likelihood and potential impact of the risk. Okay, and arrive at a value of the risk. So there are three things. When we analyze the risk, we look at the realistic likelihood, we look at the potential impact, and we look at what are the existing controls, and then we arrive at a level of the risk. So risk analysis involves consideration of what was the uncertainty, what was the risk source, what were the consequences, what was the likelihood, what were the events, what were the scenarios, what were the controls and their effect. So we consider all these seven things. Comprehending me, we comprehend what is the nature of the risk. That is the purpose of risk analysis, is finding, recognizing, and describing as to what can happen where and how. But then what is the realistic likelihood that this will happen? What is the impact of this? What was the nature of the event? What were the existing controls? What has been the effectiveness of the existing control? And then I arrive at the value of the risk. Is the distinction between risk identification and analysis clear to everybody? Okay. Now read the next paragraph. So the first step is that risk analysis may be influenced by divergence of opinions, biases, perceptions of risk, and judgment. Now, when we are going to follow a communication and consultation approach, we will be involving lot many stakeholders. Now, same example about the cab. The facility guy will say something, the cab driver will say something, the employee will say something. There will be different biases, there'll be different opinions, there'll be different perceptions, there'll be different judgments. So we have to take that into consideration. These will influence the decision making. Okay, these influences should be considered, documented, and communicated to decision makers. So you will ask the cab driver, okay, what are your constraints? You will ask the vendor, what are your constraints? You will ask the facility guy, what are your constraints? You will ask the employees, what are your considerations? And these constraints should be documented and communicated to decision maker. Who the decision maker? Maybe the facility manager or whatever at the VP level. I'm taking that. Now, highly uncertain events can be difficult to quantify. For example, now this pandemic, were very uncertain. The probability, this is also called as the black swan event, something which is very highly uncertain. But if it happens, the consequence is very high. So this can be an issue when we are analyzing events with severe consequences. The likelihood may be very uncertain. I don't know when the earthquake can happen. I do not know when the next pandemic will come. But the consequences will be very, very high. In such cases, a combination of techniques generally provides a greater insight. So a lot of brainstorming is done to arrive because we do not have 100% information in every scenario, in every case. So that uncertainty has to be taken into consideration, or that limitation has to be taken into consideration. You don't have data, historical data for everything and every time. The more detail you do into analysis, risk analysis provides an input for risk evaluation. So only when you analyze the risk and you determine the value, then only you can evaluate the risk. How? Now decisions are taken. So and risk analysis provides an input to risk evaluation to decisions on whether the risk can be treated and how and most appropriate risk treatment strategy and methods. Now this is where we answer your question. Now you have considered everything. You've taken the views of employee, the cab driver, the vendor, the facility manager, and everybody who's involved. Now you have to take a decision. What is going to be a strategy? So you already have a SLA, but it is not being met. So with a combined effort, you will see how best to reduce the likelihood and the impact of this. So only when you consider all these parameters, you do a Ishikawa model, the 5 whys, then you will come to know what should be my strategy and what should be my treatment to lower the risk. Provide insight for decisions where choices are made and options involved. Should I accept this risk? Of risk analysis. Now, what do we do in the analysis, in the evaluation stage? So, take a minute to read. So, when we evaluate the risk, this will help us to take a decision. Risk evaluation involves comparing the results of the risk analysis with the established criteria. So, what is your criteria? So, when we are looking at the criteria, so what is the criteria to determine the likelihood? So, in this case, the criteria was low, medium, high. For the impact, it was low, medium, high for the likelihood. So based on the criteria of likelihood and the impact, we have arrived at a value of high. Now, when it is high, so now as per your criteria, any risk which is following into the bucket of high needs to be treated. Treated means you have to modify the risk, either put additional controls or whatever. This risk is again coming into the high bucket. I have to do something. So I cannot say do nothing, because in this case the risk value is high. So I will consider what are the risk treatment options. Can I change the likelihood? Can I change the impact? Okay, can I retain the risk? Can I transfer the risk? Whatever. So in case the risk is following, or you will undertake further analysis to better understand this risk which you have said. In case the risk is following within your appetite, maintain the existing control. Now in this case, I cannot maintain the existing control. I need to put some additional controls or reconsider the objectives. So there are various options available after. So you have to take one of these decisions based on the what do we do in evaluation? We compare the level of the risk with the criteria and take a decision. What should I do with this risk? Should I do nothing if it is within my appetite? Consider some more options, undertake further analysis, maintain my existing controls, or reconsider objectives. So decisions should take into account wider context and the actual and perceived consequences to external and internal stakeholders. So what is the consequences to internal and external stakeholders due to employees arriving late or in a very frequently? So this is a high risk. I have to find a solution to this. I cannot leave it. So I will have to review the contract. I will have to see what is the solution. So all you and I may not be able to find the answer, but those who are involved, asking the cab driver, asking the vendor, asking the facility guy, asking the employees, taking views from many of them and taking suggestions from them, you will come to a conclusion what should be a better method to reduce the risk, reduce the likelihood and reduce the impact. Answer you will get. So when you do a root cause analysis, you will come to know, okay, what were the reasons of delay on day one? What were the reasons of delay on two? What were the reasons of delay on three? And once you look at this Ishikawa model of 5 whys, you will come to a better solution. Does that answer your question? The outcome of risk evaluation should be recorded, communicated, and then validated at approved level. So whatever we have discussed, should be recorded, communicated, and validated for appropriate and correctness. Then only people will be able to take a decision. I'm taking the same example of the cab services not being effective and giving high rise because of the consequences is arriving late. And because you're arriving late, now there was a meeting. Now you could not attend the meeting with the client. Now this will have a high impact on your customer satisfaction. So you cannot say because the employee was not there, so I could not do this. One day they will take it, next day they will not take it. Are you getting my point? Okay. So this is what is a summary of risk assessment. Risk assessment consists of 3 steps: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. Risk identification looks at what is the source of the risk, what were the causes, events, looks at threats, vulnerabilities, and capabilities, takes into consideration the changes in external and internal context, and what are the indicators of the or leading indicators of the emerging risk. Continue to retain the risk because there is nothing further we can do to address this risk. Because there is no, you'll never find a solution for everything. I'm just taking an example. If you find a solution, fine. If you don't find a solution and it is not cost effective, now, for example, somebody will say, what we can do is we will give everybody a car and let them come by their own car instead of taking the cab, and we'll pay for it. Okay, it may not be a cost effective solution. So they say, okay, that is not cost effective. So we retain the risk by continuing to use the cab drivers, but we'll try to improve our processes. So that could be a final decision. I don't know because I'm not an expert on facility management. But in case all the people are there, then we will come to a solution. Okay, that's the meaning. Okay. Now read the next paragraph, which I'm pointing to. Okay. So when we are looking at justification for risk treatment is broader than solely economic consideration. So if you are every time you are going to say that we are retaining this risk because of economic consideration, that may not be a justification. Because when we are looking at risk treatment options, we have to take into account organizations' obligations. So what are your contractual obligations? What are your legal obligations? What are your volunteer commitments towards health and safety, environmental management? And what are the stakeholder views? What does the client want? What does the customer want? What does the employee want? So all these 3 things have to be considered. You cannot always say it is not economically viable. That's why we are accepting this risk. No, that may not be a very viable justification. Then the selection of the risk treatment option should be made in accordance with the organization's objectives, criteria, and the resources available. So when we are looking at the risk treatment options, take into consideration, or you must look at what is the objective of this particular process. If I do not treat this risk, will I be able to achieve the objective? No. What is my risk criteria? My criteria says any risk which is falling in the bucket of medium and high, I must treat. So this risk is falling in the medium bucket or high bit. I must treat it. Then look at the available resources. So consideration is, do I have adequate resources? If I do not have adequate resources, so then I will have to procure those resources. Now, do I have budget for it? Is the management going to support me? So these are the considerations when you are going to select. So selecting the risk treatment option is a very challenging activity. And that is why we must apply the principle of communication and consultation when we are looking at selecting the risk treatment options. So take the views of various stakeholders, like I explained to you in looking at the cab driver, take the views of the employees, then take the views of the cab vendor, take the views of the driver, take the views of the facility guys, take the views from other people, how they are managing this cab thing from other companies, organizations. What does the market survey say? Okay, so you will go into threadbare and definitely you will find a solution. There is no way out. There is no challenge in that. Okay. So another important aspect of risk treatment is this. Now these are very important aspects you cannot forget. So it is not necessary that whatever risk treatment options you have chosen or whatever controls you have chosen to change the likelihood or change the impact, even if it is carefully designed and implemented, might not produce the expected outcome. So even the cab, even us putting other risk, the cabs may still be late and could produce unintended consequences. So monitoring and reviewing need to be an integral part of the risk treatment implementation. This is the most important thing. Whenever you are going for a risk treatment plan or whatever option you have chosen for risk treatment, you must monitor and review the implementation to give assurance that different forms of treatment become and remain effective. And risk treatment can also introduce new risks that need to be managed. For example, if you are looking at transferring the risk by buying an insurance or going into a contract, then that may introduce new risks. So that has to be managed, okay, by auditing the third party. This is one control to how to look at the third party or supply chain. Read the last thing. Your option. If there is no treatment options available, or the treatment options do not sufficiently modify the risk should be recorded and kept under review. So this is another option. So we have tried our best, but still we cannot find any more controls to ensure that the cab drivers come in. So we must keep this process under review. And this should be recorded that we are living with this risk because of best efforts. Still, we have not been able to find a solution. So every time you may not be able to find a solution. I'm just looking. The last point again is very important. Take a minute to read. So the decision makers and other stakeholders should be aware of the nature and extent of the remaining risk after treatment. And the risk remaining after treatment is equal to residual risk. The remaining risk or the residual risk should be documented and subjected to monitoring, review, and where appropriate for the treatment. Underline this line. Underline this line. Okay, let's read the last paragraph. Preparing and implementing a risk treatment plan. Take 5 minutes to go through. So the purpose of risk treatment plans. Okay, so we looked at the purpose of risk treatment. The purpose of the risk treatment plan is to specify how the chosen risk treatment options will be implemented so that arrangements are understood by those involved and progress against the plans can be monitored. So once you have selected your risk treatment options, you will need to create a risk treatment plan. And the purpose of the risk treatment plan is to provide a, you need to monitor the risk treatment plan to get a confidence as to what is the progress against the plan. And this needs to be monitored. So you have to closely monitor implementation of the risk treatment options which you have chosen. That is the purpose of the risk treatment plan. Then the risk treatment plan should clearly identify the order in which the risk treatment should be implemented. So what is the first item you will implement? What is the second item you will implement? Now, every organization has got project plans, management plans. So risk treatment plan should be integrated. So whenever the top management is reviewing their management plans, one of the agenda items should be to include the risk treatment plans, or the treatment plans must be integrated into management plans and the processes of the organization in consultation with the appropriate stakeholders. So you have to keep the top management apprised. You have to report to the top management on the progress of the risk treatment plan. Now, what should be the content of the risk treatment plan? The information provided in the treatment plan should include at a minimum all this. Minimum. And why I'm emphasizing on all these points is, in my experience, I do not find all this. I do not know whether your organization is doing that or not. But look at these aspects which must be there in a risk treatment plan. Are you doing it or not? I don't know. You can confirm to me. So we have looked at the risk treatment in great detail. First is, we will implement the option chosen, assess the effectiveness, decide on the remaining risk, and then follow the iterative approach. This is how effectively you have implemented and what are the outcomes. Is there a tangible improvement in the system? So ongoing monitoring and periodic review. Now these two words are different. Monitoring is a ongoing activity and review is periodically. So for example, you are 24/7 you are monitoring the system logs, but you do not review the system logs every minute. You periodically do it, maybe once in a day, maybe once in a week, maybe once in a quarter, depending on the sensitivity of the process. Similarly, monitoring is going to be continuous, but you will periodically review. Okay, how effective is my risk identification? Have I been able to see what are the future risks? What about the monitoring of the risk treatment plans? How many risk treatment plans have been implemented? How many have been successful? How many had to be repeated? So this is what is monitoring and review of the risk management process and its outcome. So this monitoring and review should be planned as part of the risk management process. So when you are having the or designing or documenting a risk management process, you have to keep a paragraph on monitoring and review. So monitoring will be done by A, B, C, D, E. And who is responsible for monitoring? So the periodicity of the monitoring, the periodicity of the review period, and the roles responsibilities for monitoring review must be clearly brought out when you're designing your risk management process. It's one of the very important components of the risk management process, and the monitoring and review has to be conducted at each and every stage of the risk management process, starting from establishing the scope, establishing the criteria, establishing the internal issues, external issues, risk assessment, risk treatment, etc. Clear? Then what is your process? What is your criteria? What is your policy? How are you reporting on the results of monitoring and review should be incorporated throughout the organization's performance management. So wherever the organization is doing performance management, measurement and reporting activities, as so they may be having quarterly meetings, they may be having yearly meetings with the board of directors. So the monitoring and review of the risk management process should be an integral part of the enterprise report management. The purpose of monitoring review is clear. So the purpose of monitoring and review is to see or assess how effectively we have designed, implementing, and what are the outcomes of each of these stages of the risk management process, so that we can improve on this process and make it more effective. Now, monitoring and review has to be done at all stages. So you will monitor the scope, context, criteria, internal issues may change, external issues may change, legal requirements may change, customer expectation may change. Then you will monitor risk assessment, monitor the how the risks have been identified, monitor the risk analysis, monitor the risk evaluation criteria, monitor the effective of the risk treatment plan or the implementation of the risk treatment plan. Then the results of monitoring and review needs to be shared within the organization, and the who is going to monitor, what stages you are going to monitor and review, who is responsible to do it, when are you going to do it. So the timelines, the responsibilities, the frequency has to be included in your risk management process. So there has to be a paragraph on the monitoring and review process, and this is very effectively done in most organizations that I have seen. Like to know what are the high risks in HR, what are the risks in IT, What are the risks from engagement perspective? What are the risks from legal regulatory requirement? Okay. Then provide information for decision making. So what are the decisions we have taken? Some risks we will retain after informed decision. So it may not be cost effective. We have taken a decision to retain the risk because it may not be cost effective. We have taken a decision to mitigate this risk. So I need to buy the budget, get the approval, get the buy-in from everybody. Then wherever we are lacking, when we are doing recording and monitoring and review, so where are we lacking? What are the gaps? We would like to improve the risk management processes. Okay. Then assist interaction with stakeholders. So now risk recording and reporting needs to be shared across the organization, depending on how who's relevant. So if I'm doing audit or doing a risk and compliance for 10 engagements, so I need to inform each and every engagement stakeholder what is the high risk in their areas, what is the effectiveness of the controls, where they are not complying, what action they need to take. Okay. So this is the purpose of recording and reporting, which is a very robust activity in most organizations. Now read the second paragraph. So now when we are recording and reporting, this is a very sensitive information. So what is the confidentiality of this information? Can this information be shared with to anybody? No, it will be need to know basis. It's a very strict information. It's a very confidential information. And just like in the absence of risk management, or suppose we are not looking at risk management, is there a business as usual process and policy for reporting to the organization's governance? So reporting is one of the main components of the organization's governance. So when we are having the reporting activity as part of governance, reporting on the effectiveness of the risk management should be an integral part of governance. And this will help to enhance the communication dialogue between the stakeholders, top management, oversight bodies, and this will meet the legal regulatory requirements. So the oversight body is legally bound to provide evidence of due diligence and how they are involving themselves into reporting of the risk management, reporting of the results of risk, what are the top 10 risks, what are the action they have taken, provide the evidence of due diligence. Okay. Now, factors to be considered for reporting is different stakeholders and their specific information and needs. So what is the information required by governance body? What is the information required by top management? What is the information required by various stakeholders, HODs? What is the information required by all employees? So different stakeholders will have different needs and requirements. Then what is the frequency? What is the cost? And what is the time? Because all these reports is going to consume some time, some budget is required, some resources are required. What is the cost of each of these information? Then what is the method of reporting? Some of them would be through dashboards, some of them would be through review meetings, some would be by displaying it on the portal. Okay, some would be by sending messages, some may be on a database. Then relevance of information to organization objectives and decision making, very very important. The last bullet is very important. So what is the impact to my organization based on the reports which we have reviewed? How effectively they are going to help me to achieve my objective, or how they are preventing me from achieving the objective and decision making. If this is not met, the last bullet is not met, then the entire risk management framework is a tick in the box. There is no value addition of establishing a risk management in any organization. Do you all agree with this aspect?